This entity, Zaros, would soon arrive at Gielinor. It has been almost 4,000 years since Gielinor was first populated. Guthix has seemingly departed from the realm, leaving the plane in the hands of the mortals he had brought there through the World Gate. The Purge of Kethsi. Kethsi is a planet near the Aviancy homeworld of Abaddon. It was once home to a prosperous civilization. An elder mage, Etheron, managed to find the Stone of Jas, and he returned to his home of Kethsi with the artifact. It was placed within the Mage Conclave on Mount Firewake on the Kethian Plain. Using the stone, the Kethians managed to improve their society. However, the Dragonkin, by affliction of their curse, sensed that the Stone of Jas was in the hands of false users. They soon arrived. A battle broke out, and with the use of the newly discovered Bane Ore weaponry, which could be magically tuned against creatures such as dragons, the Kethians tried to resist the Dragonkin. But it was in vain. In their last stand on the Isle of San, the Kethians were massacred. The Emergence of the Gods. While Guthix slept, many other divine beings became aware of the existence of Gielinor and made their way to the peaceful plane throughout the age. The most notable of the beings were Brassica Prime, the Cabbage God. He self-professes to command the power of highly concentrated nutrients. Saradomin. Saradomin arrived through a portal on the island of Entrana. He came to develop a personal connection to the perfection of the plane and started to desire it for himself, bringing his followers with him. Saradomin set out to establish his own kingdom. Tumeken, the Kharidian god of light who rules over the Kharidian lands, and his wife Elidanis, the goddess of fertility. Armadyl. Armadyl arrived at Gielinor with his Aviancy, looking for a new way of life, away from the hostilities of their home world of Abaddon. Other gods also arrived on the plane at lesser known periods, such as Marimbo, the ancient and cheeky matron goddess, who is rumoured to have attained godhood through a drinking competition. The Karamjan gods, Pantheon deities who are worshipped by the people of Karamja. They consist of 3 demigods, Karazi, Shaika, and Rahani. The Founding of Hallowvale. Shortly after Saradomin's arrival, he ordered Queen Efarete to lead the Icene in his new campaign on Gielinor. There, they established Hallowvale. Icene, terrified of the dark, built the Everlight and a grand capital from which to rule. Over time, the Icene of the Hallowland established the Dominion Games, which were sporting events designed to teach Saradomin's followers the arts of war, unbeknownst to them. The Icene had friendly relations with the Sirens of Wulshanko, and over time, Saradomin brought more races, such as the Lions and Centaurs, to Gielinor. Along with his human and unicorn followers, many races participated in the games, as Saradomin began carving out his territory. Eventually, a close alliance with Armadyl led to the inclusion of Aviancy competitors in the Dominion Games. The Second Age began with the arrival of Zaros. Zaros Arrives. Eventually, Zaros arrived at Gielinor, long after Guthix had entered his first sleep. Upon witnessing how the Ascended Gods had carved out their own territories in the land, Zaros was enraged by their arrogance in wanting to claim the world for themselves and in proclaiming themselves as gods. It was only Seren and him, Zaros, that were of a truly divine origin, and so Zaros decided that he would teach them obedience. He believed this was his duty. To do this, he returned to Infernus, where he approached the demon's leader, a massive Chthonian known as Hostilius, the Autocrat. There, Zaros requested 12 demonic legions in return for teaching them how to travel between worlds. Hostilius used his cunning to try to trick Zaros in the contract, stating that the legion and the knowledge would go to the eldest signatory. Not knowing, however, that Zaros was aeons older than him. As a result, Zaros attained the legions without having to share the knowledge of travelling worlds to Hostilius. The legions, consisting of Chthonian nobles, known as dukes, leading their Avernic slaves, would give Zaros incredible military power, more than any of the other gods. Zaros returned to Gielinor, near the town of Sentistan, and only brought with him 100 Avernic demons, which were led by Duke Nemesis. They sought to claim the area for Zaros, but to do so, they had to defeat Lornab. The demons lured Lornab out with sacrifices of nearby villagers, and with chants of "Hail Lornab." Lornab soon emerged from his lair, and the demons proceeded to attack it, cutting off its heads only for more heads to emerge in their places. After some time, Lornab had decimated the demonic army, weakening Zaros' strength, at which point Zaros entered the fight. Lornab charged at Zaros, and at the last second, Zaros stepped out of the way, ensnaring the now 12-headed Hydra in tentacles where he had stood. With Lornab trapped, Zaros proceeded to use his magic to turn him into a living conduit. The beast's divine energy was used to create a portal to summon the remaining demonic legions to Gielinor. When he was done, the body crumbled to stone, and Zaros left it where it was. Eventually, as the village grew into a vast city over the next 2,000 years, his remains were tossed outside of the walls, like refuse. Zaros united what would become Misthalin and most of what would become Forinthry, leaving the battle to his Chthonian dukes. Zaros civilized humans and formed a priesthood from the Sentistan tribe. They travelled and preached the word of Zaros, rapidly converting the population to his worship. Tribes became an alliance. The alliance became a nation. Within decades, Zarosian territory was as large as that of any of the more established gods, and they started to take notice. Establishment of the Menaphite Pantheon. The Menaphite Pantheon is the name given to an octet of deities who ruled over the Kharidian lands. It consisted of Tumeken, the god of light, Tumeken's wife, Elidanis, the goddess of fertility, their once pets, now children, Icthlarin, the god of the underworld, and Amascut, the goddess of rebirth. Then, the four facets of Tumeken: Abmeken, the goddess of friendship and pleasure; Krondis, the goddess of resourcefulness; Het, the god of strength; and Scabarus, the god of wisdom and isolation. The later four, Abmeken, Krondis, Het, and Scabarus, are said to have been created by Tumeken in a dream where he travelled to various places and turned an animal that acted well in an area of misbehaviour into a demigod. Tumeken's dream, according to the tales. Seeing himself in the failings of his children, Icthlarin and Amascut, Tumeken grew tired. He marked Icthlarin to rule in his stead for a time while he rested. Tumeken fell into a deep reverie for 4 days and 4 nights, where he dreamt of his journey through his realm, which at that time was made up of lush biomes full of life, not the dry desert we see in the later ages. Day 1. Het. On the first day of his dream, Tumeken chose to travel to the north of his realm, where he came across a great man-made city known as Al-Kharid. On his journey, he stayed close to the banks of the Elid. When it came time to move away from the river, he filled his skin full of Elid's essence to carry as nourishment. He passed weak men whom he tried to help, yet deep down he pitied their vulnerability. It wasn't long before he found himself walking along the northern border's mountain range, where he came across the statue of a man radiating strength and health. Impressed, Tumeken gave the statue a piece of himself to help him rule this area of the desert with strength and resilience. The lesser god Het was born. Day 2. Abmeken. On the second day, Tumeken travelled to the west of the realm. It was known that there were 2 encampments of men dwelling in that region, both on opposing forces. It was here that he saw the groups arguing over all manner of things. However, beyond the groups, there was a troop of apes, peening and playing together. He called out to them, and one of the apes approached and climbed onto the god's shoulders. Tumeken stroked the ape's chin, blessing her, and so the lesser god Abmeken was born. Day 3. Krondis. On the third day, Tumeken travelled to the east of his realm. Here, there was a great swampland on the border of an even greater city known as Ulek. A great feast was held by the people of Ulek upon Tumeken's arrival, which opened his eyes to the wastefulness of it all. Disheartened, Tumeken left to wander the swamp and came across a crocodile. A sleek but powerful animal that earned its own food. Tumeken admired that the crocodile only took what it needed from the land and granted it a part of himself to help rule the land as the lesser-known god Krondus. Day 4. Scabaras. On the 4th day, Tumeken travelled south. This day was particularly hot enough to wear the god down. He took his water skin to quench his thirst, only to discover that it was empty. He pressed on, looking for shelter from the bearing desert sun. He came across a tunnel where he took shelter. Here he caught sight upon a cautious beetle. It kept appearing and scurrying away, until the god eventually captured it, with the view that it would be able to lead back those that had strayed too far. He granted the scarab with a piece of himself, creating the final lesser god, Scabaras. Armadyl's arrival. Not much is known of Armadyl's activities in Gielinor following his arrival. There was a group of humans known as Icovians that came to worship Armadyl, which then evolved later into the Guardians of Armadyl. Armadyl entrusted them with the protection of his staff, holding it in their temple, the Temple of Ikov. Before this, it was guarded by the Aviancy, who mostly inhabited Gielinor's floating islands. Elven Expansion. The elves, by now a very established and prosperous people hidden in the forests of Isafdar, set their sights on exploring the lands east of them, past the impassable mountain range bordering Tiramun. These mountains were known as the Galapos Mountains. Many of the elves travelled east via the underground pass, taking them under the Galapos Mountains through the use of the Well of Voyage, which allows transport between Tiramun and Kandarin. Here, the elves befriended the gnomes and the humans. Expansion of the Zarosian Empire. Over the course of several centuries, Zaros' empire grew to a massive size, covering more land than any kingdom has since. Zaros ruled with force, aiming to control all of Gielinor. The capital of the empire remained as Sentistan, a large city in the south of the empire, and the most advanced settlement of its time, even rivaling Prifdinus. Other fortresses and cities also rose from the ground and were scattered throughout the empire. The most notable of which are Gorok, Karalanga, Dariak, Padawa, Carol, and Anakar. The empire was in constant expansion due to the continuous campaigns in all cardinal directions, which mostly ended in success. However, the constant warfare and dominance of aggressive and hostile races, such as demons, made for poor living conditions for those living in the lower classes of society, most noticeably for the humans living under Zaros' reign. The Kharidian-Zarosian War. During the Second Age, the peace of the desert became under threat when Zaros, the god of fate and control, sought to expand his already extensive empire into the Menaphite territory. This began the long and bloody conflict that became known as the Kharidian-Zarosian War. The Menaphites assembled an army, supplemented with mercenaries, to try to fight back. But the Zarosian forces proved too powerful. The Menaphites started to lose more and more ground, and the situation became dire. At this point, Icthlarin and his sister Amascut set out to other planes with the hopes of rallying some allies strong enough to aid the defence of their lands. They came across the destroyed planet of Freneske, home to the powerful Margaret. Icthlarin was able to convince their tribe of nearly 500 to join him with the promise of bloodshed. With the Margaret in tow, Icthlarin returned to Gielinor in the thick of battle. With an almost immediate effect, the tide of the war began to change, as the Margaret quickly started to eradicate the Zarosian forces. For the first time in this war, the Kharidians were gaining the upper hand. Ultimately, the Kharidian forces were successfully able to expel the Zarosians from the desert. They won the war. Following the war, more trouble faced Icthlarin in the form of his recent allies, the Margaret. Most notably of all was Sliske. Sliske used his abilities during the war to create white minions. With the war over, Icthlarin, the god of the dead, could not stand by and ignore this any longer. When Sliske inevitably refused to hand the whites over, Icthlarin took them by force and released them to the underworld. Duke Ceres, a Chthonian demon and the 4th Legion commander of the Zarosian Empire, offered the Margaret a place in the Zarosian Empire. Sliske accepted the offer, and over time, more Margaret came over to the Zarosian side. The now Zarosian Margaret rose from Kharid-et, a Zarosian temple fortress, with the Zarosian legions and attacked the Kharidian forces that had retreated south. The Margaret who hadn't turned against Icthlarin made a last stand against them. At this point, Tumeken, the head of the Menaphite Pantheon, interfered, sacrificing himself. Tumeken exploded in an enormous blast, destroying much of his own army, as well as the Legion. This explosion caused a giant desert to be created between the lands, preventing any further large-scale attacks from the north. This act also forced Zaros into the realization that he had begun to act like the gods he claimed to fight against. He retreated back into his empire with his remaining troops. Amascut's mind warps. During the Kharidian-Zarosian War, along with her brother Icthlarin, Amascut travelled to Freneske, where they recruited the Margaret. However, their behaviour, including the ritual of rejuvenation, disturbed Amascut, the goddess of rebirth. She left the village and headed toward the volcano, where Ma resided. The effects of witnessing the ritual and her journey to Mars volcano were not evident in Amascut for some time. After the death of Pharaoh Queen Senlitan, Tumeken's mortal representative, the Margarat committed their coup against the Kharidians. Amascut had screamed through tears for her father, Tumeken, to not sacrifice himself. But when he did, Amascut snapped. She became known and feared as the Devourer. Abandoning her position of the goddess of rebirth, she began consuming the souls of all beings to increase her own power. She became so enthralled with destruction and power, she slaughtered her own worshippers. Her clergy did not intervene until she began destroying her own temples and murdering her priestesses, at which point they cursed her, never to be remembered, never to possess a corporeal body for too long. In turn, she cursed them into the bodies of cats. Icthlarin then blessed them with eternal life, hoping that they would use the powers Amascut once blessed them with to continue to hinder her. To this day, Amascut fears cats, not knowing which are her former followers. In addition, Icthlarin appointed the Sphinx as the guardian of the feline kind, guarding them against the agents of the Devourer, in return for eternal life. Despite losing this battle, Zaros' empire would continue to flourish. Even so, no empire can last forever, much less an empire vulnerable to treason.